Now, the woolliest part in my mind of these lines of thought is when we get to the information processing aspect of it. He seems to suggest that psychofunctionalism really is very conducive to this information processing means of understanding at least those aspects of mentality. But it seems like both functionalism and psychofunctionalism are capable of explaining these information processing tasks, at least in the case of the homunculi experiment. So the headless horseman can still ride his horse, the brainwasher's body can still drive his car around town, regardless of whether or not his brain is communicating with the body, or the homunculi horde is what's controlling the body. In either case, it still seems to have that cognitive capacity, that informationally characterizable capacity, the ability to process that information and translate it into motor skill reactions so that he can drive. Thus, both functionalism and psychofunctionalism seem quite capable of explaining information processing or cognitive capacities. They both seem to be able to explain how it would be that this homunculi head is capable of doing those things. However, I think he seems to suggest that they're both too chauvinistic. And I think the reason for this is sort of twofold. On the one hand, we have that Martian story, so that we can have an information processing task and characterize it in terms of inputs and outputs. But how it gets realized in the intervening processing steps, that may deviate quite dramatically. And if we think that our information processing theory has got to include things like beliefs or desires and not maybe, databases or depictive representations, then we may well not be able to capture a wide variety of things. So for instance, the homunculi head, presumably at least the washer guy, can drive a car. Both functionalism and psychofunctionalism seem well positioned to be able to explain the washer guy's body's ability to drive that car, whether it's the homunculi horde or the washer guy's brain that is connecting the inputs to the outputs. However, if that car is a Tesla, that car is also capable of driving itself. And the information processing explanation of that car's ability to drive itself through autopilot isn't going to look anything like the explanations that are available to functionalism or psychofunctionalism. The car, for instance, is going to have body-embedded LiDAR sensors. It's going to have a global positioning tracker. It's going to have algorithms for integrating that information into a set of commands for controlling the speed and direction of the car. And of course, none of those things are going to be part of the functional or psychofunctional explanations. So again, if we tried to get around the chauvinistic difficulties faced by functionalism or psychofunctionalism, if we characterize things in a broad enough information processing way, Bloch wants to suggest that we're not going to be able to do it. And again, I think it's that we can't come up with any sort of universal kind of psychofunctionalism, even in the case of information processing. And that, I think, is that final section where he talks about the input and output characterizations and whether or not functionalists could ever come up with adequate input and output characterizations. This part is very troubling, in part because these explanations are quite successful and are performed across all sorts of different species of animals and even non-living entities. So they seem to be capable of doing this, and yet Bloch wants to claim that they're not, and yet he doesn't seem completely convinced of it either. I'm not really sure what to make of this particular line of thought. Perhaps the somewhat indeterminate nature of some of these lines of thought reflects the fact that Bloch is only trying to come up with something like a burden of proof argument against the functionalist. He's not trying to come up with a black and white, clear-cut refutation of these theories. He's merely trying to indicate that they have to do more to make their case to the skeptic. He's merely trying to indicate that they have to do more to make their case, to flesh out the sketch that they've given about how they would go about understanding the nature of mental states.